and the wider community here. You guys are so lucky to have this right close to you. It's a treasure of a place, and even more so a treasure of people and people. Amazing Sangha you have here. So we're just coming towards the end of a retreat here, and I'm thinking of this as you're joining the retreat. You know, you're thinking you're coming for the Sunday, but it's almost like you're walking into the retreat. So I'm going to kind of continue with where I've been in the retreat. So we've been meditating here for the last 3 days on sky-like mind. Sky-like mind, which is a synonym for the true nature that Reverend Ginger just spoke of, which I didn't know the circle symbolized until just now. It's like, oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, so no beginning and no end, idea of the nature. And so one of my teachers used to call this nature the face that we had before we were born. So the idea of being a primordial essence, something that's been with us for a long time, maybe even longer than this life. But like anything in a contemplative tradition where our work is the inner work, it begins as a possibility or a hypothesis. And then the practice of meditation is how we test and deepen and inquire. Yeah. So we have a short time this morning before the Q&A, so that I'm giving my remarks here. My talk is going to be fairly brief. So I wanted to just say a bit about the true nature, a bit about that which is, we call in the tradition in which I practice, sometimes we call it sky-like awareness. Sky-like awareness. And then a little bit about how we access it, and then I'll take questions. But you have so many opportunities here to access it. It's really the access is in our practice. The teacher of the true nature is our practice itself. That's what reveals it to us, the sitting and the being with ourselves. So our baseline experience with the mind isn't necessarily that we have a sky-like mind. Our mind can feel really crowded in here, really crowded, like a constant, this constant barrage of thought. So that's true too. That's also true. It's true that we're in a crowded mind, that part of our mind it's just like a monkey. It's running from stimulus to stimulus and reacting to every stimulus, every sound, every word, every thought. So we might call that the monkey mind, because it's like that. It's restless and it's moving and it's having trouble settling all the time. That's our monkey mind. So when we are involved with that monkey mind, it seems like there's nothing else. That's all there is. And when we first come to practice, it seems like that's all there is. Where's the sky-like mind in that, right? We're wondering, perhaps wondering. But the lineage of meditators of the past tell us, and at least me, my initial interest was piqued by listening to that message, that there's more to the mind than that. There's more to the mind than our feeling of the self and the world out there in this constant ping pong of reactivity. More to that, more than that. So what those masters tell us is that there's also an essence to that mind. There's its manifestation, but there's also its essence. There's its expression, and then there's also the base out of which that expression arises. And they've given that many names over the centuries in many languages, right? From India to China to Japan to Tibet to Ladakh to Sikkim to Sri Lanka to Burma, all the countries that practice meditation, the Buddha nature, Dharmakaya, awareness, sky-like awareness, the essence, the face that you had before you were born. So all the different names for that same thing, that there is a part of us, even with all the chaos of the monkey mind, that is already free. A part of us that is holding what's arising, that is the space in which all of this is arising, that too is with us. But in the cacophony, in the noise, you could say, of the monkey mind, the noise that that's making in us, in the trembling of our nervous system, with all of that noise, it's hard to hear the space. It's hard to use the metaphor of sound, it's hard to hear the silence, the openness, the luminous space of our nature. Because a lot of other things are happening, and we're very enmeshed in what's happening. We're enmeshed. So our practice of meditation, these practices of sitting, these practices of stilling, these practices of breathing, these practices of concentration, of, say, staying with the energy below the navel, or resting at the heart, or resting with sky gazing, as we've been doing here for the week, are all different methods of beginning to settle that wild and seemingly untamed part of our mind, and to start to hear, use the hearing analogy, hear the whisper of our true nature, or hear the whisper of sky-like awareness, the part of us that is holding the chaos, the non-chaotic space, the infinite space that is holding everything that is arising. So that's what meditation is. In some ways, you could define it that way. That is what meditation is. But on the path of meditation, we need a lot of patience. I sometimes like to think of meditation as the act of radically tolerating yourself, because there's a lot right here to tolerate, to be patient with, while whatever it is that we're wanting to see, needing to see, makes itself known to us. So then what these masters have said over the centuries, and I don't take this myself, it's not enough to care that the masters have said it. We have to know it ourselves, right? We can hear that. It's helpful to hear it because we need some kind of finger pointing us in a direction. But essentially, these masters and scriptures say, this is innate. This is inborn. This is not something that we need to make be present. Just like, even if we wanted to, right, imagine, we all have a physical heart. Maybe you have a transplant heart. All things are possible here, but we have something going on here in the chest, right? We couldn't, if we wanted to, make it be present. It's just there, right? That's part of being alive, is we have this beating heart, right? It's part of what an essential, fundamental thing that's keeping our body alive. So the true nature is like that. We can't think it into existence. We couldn't wish it into existence, our sky-like nature. We couldn't practice it into existence. We can't even cultivate it, really. Not really. We can cultivate practices, but we can't make it any better. We can't improve it. And then nothing that we do could ruin it either. Nothing, no terrible thing that we have done will have soiled it. So it just is, just like the sky just is, or our heart just is. It just is, just is. So this has really interesting implications. And one of the implications is that if it just is, and nothing that we do can improve it, and we can't bring it into existence, that our practice is not so much about making a sky-like awareness present, or making, using other words, a true nature present, or making a Buddha nature present, but it's about mining the body-mind for what's already there. So more about, or diving into the body-mind to discover what is already present. It's already there. So the metaphor for practice isn't so much like building a house, building a strong foundation and building a house, although it could be. I've heard that metaphor used, but there are limitations to it, because what we're doing is finding what's already present. So there's this one Mahayana sutra. Sutra means like the words of the Buddha, or the words of the Buddhas out there in the world. There's a story, a little parable told in one of these beautiful scriptures, sutras, of an old person. It's an old man who lives in a house, in this little house, and he's been searching his whole life for the fruits of his spiritual practice. Oh no, I know what it is. Yeah, he's a miner of jewels, and he's been going out, it's a parable, and he's been mining for jewels his whole life and looking for them in the world out there, in the mountains out there. And he never found any jewels. He never found them. And he's towards the end of his life. You can just imagine him in his little hut, feeling the disappointment of never having found the jewels. And the parable says, but actually what he didn't know is that all along, under the floorboards of his house, of his little house, there was a whole cache of jewels, right? So they use that in this scripture as a metaphor for us, that we're like working so hard our whole lives to find peace and to find freedom and to find joy, to find happiness. We're so motivated to live a fulfilled life. And we're looking out there, right? Just like the man in the parable, we are grasping at teachings and looking for books, and we're looking for podcasts and CDs to enlighten ourselves and to wake ourselves up, or we're looking towards food, or we're looking towards substances that will numb our pain, we're looking towards whatever, alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever we're looking out there for, to bring us greater ease, to bring us greater satisfaction, to help us live a happier life. And all along, what we've been looking for is here. It's right here, right now, innate. And so that was also the key, this core teaching of the Buddhas, plural, or the Shakyamuni Buddha, certainly, that what we've been looking for is here. And the causes of our suffering are also here in the conditioned self. And we need look no further for what it is that we've been seeking to experience greater joy, freedom, satisfaction, and resilience. So yeah. So one implication is that actually our practice should be less about seeking, or at least if we're seeking, we have to balance that with seeking in here, right? We can't just be seeking out there, but our practice has to go in. We have to look in, or we won't find what we're looking for. That's a powerful message from the lineages. But then also another implication of that this is innate, inborn, primordial to who we are, is that our process, once we do start looking in, And once we do start practicing, it's not so much a process of construction, of building the house of practice, but it's more about dismantling what's in the way of seeing that we have this primordially. So much more about relaxing and letting go than about holding on and constructing. And so that's what we've been trying to do here together for the last 3 days, is relax and let go and rest in things as they are, taking the sky as our teacher, or as a metaphor, but also as a teacher. Because the sky is mirroring back to us those qualities: spacious, self-illuminating, accepting of everything that's in it, non-judgmental, non-micromanaging. Sky's just doing what it's doing. And so is that part in ourselves. So that's what we've been practicing with here. So in one way, our practice is about allowing, just allowing what's always been here to be more present. So our spiritual path is a pilgrimage home. I want to leave a little time for some questions. So I'm going to open it now to anything that anyone might want to offer, bring into the room. This is always my favorite part. Yes. And say your name for people that haven't been here too. Yeah.
My name's Stephen. If, let's say if you take light out of the sky and you take dark out of the sky, which might be, like I can remove the subject from a situation, I get emptiness. If I move the object, I get non-separation. But I still have an echo of myself around, and that happens. And I'm struggling to remove the light and the dark, or to see both at the same time. Is there any assistance you have for that?
Okay. Is asking about removing the light and the dark at the same time. And what brings up for me is the question of why they need to be removed. Because need to be removed. And when you say the light and the dark, are you relating those to self, the sense of self?
Light as subject.
As object. Okay. Yeah. So my question would be, I don't know that we have to remove them. We don't have to remove them. That's a project. That's a big project. And lately I've been thinking, on this path we talk about selflessness. And yes, selflessness. But what does that mean, really? Because it's hard for me to believe, in fact, I don't believe, that the Buddhas of the past didn't have a self. They had a personality. They had humor. If I read the scriptures of the Buddha, there's a lot of humor in the scriptures. If you know something about Indian culture, he's totally riffing on the caste system, but he's totally reconfiguring the caste system, saying there is no caste system, but he does it in this really skillful and kind of humorous way. So it makes me think, the Buddha had a personality. Buddha Shakyamuni, for example, or any of the awakened ones in our past. So I think that when we talk about selflessness, and from a psychological standpoint, we need a healthy sense of self, a functional self. So I don't know that the answer is to remove the self, but more to see it as a construction, and the light and the dark, see them as construction, because they are, right? They're a construction. That whole idea of self and other is a conceptual framework, right? So more about accessing the non-conceptual framework, which has nothing to do with removing, really. Yeah. That's my thought on that.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. What would be a method for that? For realizing your sky-like mind? Well, there's many methods. There are. But I'm just going to talk about, I'm going to mention that one way to see it, and I'm speaking out of a particular background of training that may be different from the training, say, here at this center, but in my background, 4 ways that I like to think about to help me, 4 ways. And the first, I'm just going to mention the 4 really quickly, and then I'll just talk about one, because that's one you could take as a take-home, easy take-home. So one is the way of allowing, and the second is the way of metaphor, and the third is the way of love, and the fourth is the way of pointing out. But the first, is what a lot of what we've been doing here. How do we access that sky-like nature? We do a lot of allowing and not so much constructing. So the core practice for that, realizing that, is a practice of letting go of all practices and just being. And when I say letting go of all practices, it's the non-practicing practice. It's non-meditation. And we are practicing something, but it isn't a structured meditation. It is becoming intimate with what is happening in the present moment. And that's the practice. It's allowing things to be as they are and becoming intimate with things as they are. And that's it. Because if we do that, if we just allow, this is another thing that is as it is our true nature. So if we're starting to tune into things as they are, our true nature will come forward. Our sky-like mind will foreground instead of background. So the principal technique is letting go of meditation. Yes, a practice of showing up on the cushion, but not that way that we used to show up with a whole agenda and all the baggage of what we must do. So we get rid of it all and we just be, which is more challenging than it sounds. Simple, but not easy like that. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So yesterday you gave an instruction, and it's not a new instruction, but it was important yesterday. It's where did the thought come from? So I'm watching the sky. I had a thought, and it was actually a train of thought, and then I remembered the instruction. Where did that thought come from? And so I, tried to follow it, but then I went back and I thought, where did that thought come from? The thought to say, where did that thought come from, right? Mm-hmm. And then I realized, then I thought about it a little bit, and then I realized it was a seed planted. But then I thought, well, what are all the other seeds that get planted? And maybe that's good seed, maybe that's bad seed. Is there good and bad? But like, what do we do with all the plants? And is there like discernment that happens? Oh, that's it. Or do we recognize that that's like a seed that was planted and wipe it away? Or what do we do with that once we recognize it?
You're still thinking.
Yeah.
Yes, you're still thinking. So it's really a seeing. So don't think about where it came from. Don't think about where that thought came from. Try to see the birthplace of a thought. Try to see the birthplace of a thought. So this is the koan. It's a koan. Let's take it as a koan. Koan. Where was my thought born? Koan. So just as a seeing, not as a thinking about it. If you think about it, it's going to be seeds. It's going to be it came from the previous thought. It's going to be a deconstruction project involving lots of thinking. But this is a seeing. Yeah. Okay. And how are we doing? I can't really see it that well because the sun from here, it's like a little before 11. Yeah. Okay. So let's take another question or two. Yes, let's do it. Can we bring the mic over here? Thank you. Thank you.
Hi. I was wondering if you have any advice or to speak to anything about if this is something that's sometimes accessible to me, but I can get to places of like self-abandonment or like neglect of the material. How do you choose your priorities? How do you choose both, I guess?
Yeah, you have to balance, right? The balance, you have to take care of this relative self. You need to love it up. Love it up. So a question might be for you, like to look into why am I abandoning myself? And that can be a beautiful place of inquiry. So another thing we talked about this weekend is how important it is to love those parts of the self that are doing whatever they're doing. And we call them in this retreat the beautiful monsters. To love your beautiful monsters. And you have to embrace them and pay attention to them because they need that for you to practice. They need that. And you need them and they need you, which isn't how we usually think about them. We think about them in more terms like, oh, it's bothering me, it's afflicting me, but it's not. It's okay to embrace that. So that question, why am I abandoning myself? And then, by all means necessary, inquiring into that, alone and with another person, if possible. Like I've been saying to people here that I believe in the practice and therapy hand in hand for some of this stuff. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. You're welcome. And right here, too.
I hear this point about coming home and not looking outward. And then I also wonder about what do I do in the outer world and when I am making decisions about what job to do or where to live. And I wonder if you could speak to that.
Yeah. I think there's a wisdom that comes from coming home, a discernment that can arise from that. So, and also what we didn't go into as much in this retreat, but I love to explore this a lot, my own way. It's part of my practice, is what does your body say about those questions? Like about the discernment you're trying to make about what job to get, where to go in the world, slowing down and coming into your body and asking your body, where does it want to be? With whom does it want to partner or be close to? What does it want as its circle of care, its friend group? What does it want to do in the world? Instead of asking your mind, try asking your body, and it will give you new and fresh answers to those questions. And below the conscious mind, your body has a wisdom, and it's probably communicating, but we don't usually listen that much to the body. So I don't know if that's helpful. Yeah.
In regards to selflessness, this is a question that I always kind of contemplate, because we all have an ego, and I think about what it is to become enlightened and how that's sort of a tearing down of our ego. And I'm curious about your thoughts on the connection of ego or sense of self and selflessness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Also in regards to, the personality that the Buddhas had, even if they were selfless.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, so I think the ultimate end of our practice is not to do away with our relative self, but to loosen the grasping to the relative self and the identification with the relative self as our ultimate refuge. And the more we connect to and take refuge in our true nature, or whatever it is that you want to call it, which is non-ego, the selfless self, so to speak, or the selfless awareness, the more we identify with that, the less we grasp at that other refuge, me, and all the things that we identify with me, name, form, job, skills, whatever it is that we identify with. Less interested in that and more interested in being in this place that is more boundless and less confined by that kind of definition. So the project of breaking through that illusion of self is a lifelong journey. I call it a lifelong journey that involves that constant letting go of the grasping, but not letting go of who you are completely, not letting go of who you are, but letting go of the grasping, and then also connecting to something that's more of a refuge in yourself. Does that help? Okay, that's how I see that whole thing. And I used to be much more, like, must get rid of the self. I hardly talk about the self anymore, because I'm not that I don't ever talk about it. Like, I'm talking about it now. But I think it can become co-opted as a project to excise, to take out from within some part of us, to cut out parts of ourselves that we don't like, calling them ego or calling them whatever we call them, the troublesome parts. And what they really need is not excising or exiling. What they need is to be loved, actually. And they need to be loved into freedom. So I'm a person that believes in loving your parts into freedom instead of exiling them. Oh, that's part of the ego. That's an ego project. Those are ways, those are our strategies of trying to get rid of the parts we don't like. Yes. Okay. I think unfortunately, we're going to need to conclude, or fortunately. It's been so lovely to meet the community, but our retreat isn't even over yet. So those of you who are with us here on retreat, we're going to take a 20-minute break after the conclusion of this session.